Hello and welcome, everyone. I'm Laura Lunsflust, an artistic director for 5x5. Thanks for being here today. This is the second of 5 composer chats we are presenting this spring. In this series, we invite you, the audience, to meet and interact with composers and their music through performance and conversation. Today's composer chat, Life Through Our Windows, features composers Sophie Stone and Sungmin Shin and new works they have written to be performed on Zoom. Postcard-sized pieces by Sophie Stone and Postlude 2020 by Sungmin Shin are intimate pieces that explore the fragility in our lives, connecting us through our hope, sorrow, and dreams. 5x5 continues to find new ways to bring the music and the people who make that music to you. We have a wonderful creative and technical team behind the scenes making these programs possible, but we ask for your patience with us if you experience any technical bumps today. We are grateful for support from the Genesee Valley Council on the Arts, the Rochester Community Foundation, Wegmans, Genesee Valley Orchestra and Chorus, the Eastman Community Music School, and individual donors who have been so generous these past months. It gives me great pleasure to introduce our Composer Chats host, Evan Meccarello. Evan directs 4 orchestras in New York and Connecticut, and recently led a contemporary classical ensemble for students online through the Hochstein School. Evan?
Thank you, Laura. Good afternoon and welcome to our second composer chat, Life Through Our Windows. We are so pleased to share this space today with composers Sophie Stone and Sungmin Shin. We'll hear 5x5 perform an ensemble piece by each composer live with the musicians each playing from their own homes. The music today was specifically created to be performed in this medium of Zoom video chat. So what you experience today is the full intentional art crafted for the possibilities of this medium. We are delighted to have our live audience in Zoom with us, as well as more of you watching live on Facebook. Thanks for being here. 5x5 strongly suggests everyone listening grab a pair of headphones today for the music that is coming up. All of the music is very soft and subtle in extended passages, so you will really benefit from having headphones. So if available, be sure to grab some headphones before we get to the music. Korean-American guitarist and composer Sungmin Shin maintains a vigorous schedule performing and teaching in a wide variety of settings. As a musician, Dr. Shin finds a unique balance between his classical training and deep roots in popular guitar styles. This combination drives his curiosity to seek new ways of expression through performance, improvisation, and composition. Dr. Shin has taught, performed, and adjudicated at major international competitions and events, including the Guitar Foundation of America, Iserlohn Guitar Festival, Rochester International Jazz Festival, among others. In addition to 5x5, he is a member of acclaimed guitar ensemble Tantalus Quartet and the folk jazz rock group Lauren and the Good Souls. He is currently on faculty at the University of Buffalo and Rochester Institute of Technology, where he directs the guitar ensemble, teaches acoustic, classical, and electric guitars, and the history of popular music. Sung, welcome, and thanks for chatting with us today.
Hi everyone, hello Evan.
We're so glad to have you here. You know the fellow musicians of your ensemble, 5x5, so intimately. When you're writing a piece like this Postlude 2020, are you thinking about them as individuals? Are you thinking about their instruments more purely compositionally, so to speak?
I think it's a little bit of both, I mean, I definitely know how well everyone plays, and there are also, I think, little things that I probably won't mention specifically, but I know there's specific techniques that certain players aren't super fond of, so I definitely tried to avoid those. And but otherwise, I mean, everyone they're such, everyone in the group are so accomplished, and I trust their artistic and musical decisions also. So it was very easy to write for this group.
It's wonderful to have such a strong connection to the people you're writing music for, that you play with all the time.
Yes.
You mentioned different techniques, and in this contemporary world of ours, there's so many facets of music making. There's so many styles. You yourself are a cross-genre performer. You do intensive classical music, contemporary classical, rock, jazz. What are your big influences when writing music, and this piece in particular?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think a little bit of everything, and I think it's probably true for most, if not all, composers. It's like I think all the experiences that you've had, whether through its music or even just life experiences, it all kind of just soaks in, I think. But I think specifically for this piece, I probably would say John Cage's music is probably a big factor. He has a lot of the experimental music, but he also has a set of piano pieces. I think one in particular is called The Inner Landscape, which is very peaceful and very beautiful, very meditative. And I think that kind of sound was an important part. And then aside from that, the melodic and harmonic language is it's very much like a kind of a modern jazz influenced sound. So Brad Maldell probably is a big influence, and I could list off probably 1,000 guitar players, but I mean Pat Metheny is a really big influence, and yeah, so I probably would start there.
That's wonderful. You speak of collected experiences, and a big part of today's program is reflecting on our collective experience of the last year. And that's reflected in the music that we are playing here today, written and intended to be played on Zoom through the windows of our screens. When you think about this medium, whose live Zoom performances have really spoken to you or inspired you?
That's a good question. There's certainly been a lot of Zoom performances. Um, I think well, not to circumvent the question, but one important memory for me was before the whole pandemic. The last concert, the actual in-person concert, I think that I really attended was Bobby McFerrin. He came and played a concert at Eastman School of Music, and that was I think literally like the week before, and then I think Five by Five had a concert like near the end of March or something like that. But yeah, I remember that Bobby McFerrin concert was just an incredible concert, and after that it was all kind of just all Zoom stuff, and it's definitely difficult to compare. I think from experience when you are really in person. But I think at the same time, when you experience a concert, whatever live stream, whether it's Facebook, YouTube, or if it's a Zoom event, the you still do have the togetherness. I think and it's like kind of being in the now. It's and it kind of like when I was at that Bobby McFerrin concert, it was just like being in the moment, and he's obviously a phenomenal performer, and he does a lot of improvisation, and that's an important part of that. And I think you can still get I think that on a virtual event because uh, especially when you're watching it like I think in real time. So it's like not like a pre-recorded or after the fact. And it's just like kind of like the energy of just being together at the same time and place in a way, right? So
Absolutely. And overcoming these challenges in creative ways, structuring a piece that works for that.
yes,
There's going to be delay, but we can still organize it and make beautiful compositions in that medium. Uh, we'll get back to the idea of what it takes to perform like this in just a moment with some of the other members of your ensemble, Five by Five. But I wanted to ask you, I know you're a phenomenal guitarist. How separate is that, or how much a part of that is intertwined in your composing? I know you have a very young daughter who you're teaching guitar to at the moment, and I wondered if how her spirit may have affected you as a musician or composer.
yeah. our 4-year-old who's gonna be turning 5 in about a week or so. She definitely has a lot of energy. So it's a little bit of like energy going both ways. Like her energy, you kind of take it in, but you have to also give back a lot of energy. So it can be, especially physically, very challenging interacting with a young child. But also again with like the energy, I think she gives back. It kind of replenishes it. And I think interacting for me as a guitarist, I do try to compose a lot on my instrument because I do like to try and first hear things in real time and experience them. And even when you do that, and especially if I also do write a good amount from the keyboard. I find sometimes I'm not a very good keyboard player, piano player, but it's just a different kind of perspective coming from a guitarist perspective, and it just kind of gives you some ideas. But I'm sure all composers know that, especially if you're writing for an instrument you don't play, until you hear like a real musician play it, it's never exactly how you intended or imagined in a way, and you always have to kind of tweak it a little bit. And I think I assume maybe the more experience you have, you can get better at kind of anticipating like how it will really actually sound like once you've written it down. And but I do personally try to start from really improvising and playing around with ideas so that I can kind of have a springboard. And I think I'm sure with many composers, you start with some ideas, and then you have to kind of think through a lot more thinking after the fact. And then I think after you hear the musicians actually play it, then you sometimes do need to kind of make some adjustments, right?
Yeah, there's a back and forth, a give and take,
Yes.
a sharing of energy that way. Yeah. At this point, I'd like to invite the members of Five by Five to turn on their cameras and join us. In addition to Laura Lentz on the flute, we have Marcy Bacon, clarinet, and Sungmin Shin on guitar, of course, Eric Polenik, bass, and Heyoon Jun on piano. Hi, Five by Five. How does it feel as an ensemble to have the composer play with you? What is that like?
Think sometimes you just have to get over the initial shock that they know your part so well that if you mess up something you're like, oh great, I know he knows this piece. So I think, but once you get over that, it's actually it's nice because with the composer right there, you can immediately ask questions and experiment, and you can have this dialogue. As Sung brought up, usually if you're playing the instrument, you probably know more detailed than most composers on certain things, and so you can bring ideas to them and problem solve right on the spot, which is really nice.
Yeah, there's no place to hide, in other words, but you have a good relationship. It must be really beautiful. I know that Five by Five has performed some of your pieces, or arrangements, Eric.
Yeah.
I was wondering, do any of the other members have something percolating in the back of their brains for the ensemble? Have you considered it?
I always have things percolating, but I have this problem with I don't really know how to write for bass, and I really don't know how to write for guitar. So my ideas have not yet come to fruition, although I actually ran one by the group and they gave me the thumbs up. So maybe this summer will be my opportunity to take one of my B-sides from one of my favorite pop group and turn it into something magical that we can play next year.
Well, that's just great. Yeah, there's such a tradition, right, of in classical music of performer composers that
One thing that I want to say, I'm not a composer by any means, but one thing that I think I love that we all do together is we actually compose through improvising. And being a part of a classical group that does that is pretty amazing. And that's something that we've bonded over since the beginning. And I consider myself lucky to have found a group of musicians, classically trained musicians who are also fond and fabulous at improvising. And so we have a lot of fun doing that.
what kinds of freedoms, inspirations, or challenges has this Zoom medium of music making brought you?
Mainly technical, I would say.
Yeah, I was.
Because we're trying, on the one hand, the artistic side, we want to make sure that we're doing something that's able to come through the technology that we have and be an enjoyable experience on the other end. But there are kind of a lot of barriers, from like, well, this person needs to be 6 feet from their microphone to sound balanced with somebody else who needs to be 3 inches from the microphone. So there's just been a lot of technical trial and error to try to get to where we are today.
I miss feeling the energy of the group. Eric always performs in front of me, and Eric and I have a interaction going on. Marcy's right next to me usually. I miss that. So like this, we're not feeling each other's energy. I mean, we're responding to each other, of course, but it's just so different. And we're definitely looking forward to playing together again in person.
There are so many challenges. Is there things that have been unlocked that, or maybe magnified by this experience, that have surprised you or shown you something new in music? Is there any, or maybe an experience of performing live on Zoom that was unexpected?
Well, maybe not the performing through Zoom quite, but we've been doing quite a bit of remote recording, and we do a lot of rehearsing through Zoom for these projects where we do remote recording projects. And I think we've all been like very pleasantly surprised with the results, and though that we've had to kind of invent a completely new way of rehearsing together through Zoom, because we're not really actually playing together on Zoom typically. It's more discussion. We do now and then, I think, try excerpts and discuss phrasing and things like that, but it's a lot of discussing and talking about the recording and how do we tweak things. And it's something that we probably would have never done to that degree if not for the pandemic in a way, but it's definitely pushed us in, I think, an interesting direction.
Yeah, I think in this year more than any, we've like sat down together with the score and like really had to pour over. I mean, the rehearsing through Zoom has forced us to do that. So we have to go and recognize, okay, the clarinet part has mezzo piano here, the bass part has piano. Did the composer write this thinking of the balance issues between the two instruments, or do they want the clarinet to be more prominent than the bass? And so really getting into that level of detail on the stuff we've been recording has been enjoyable.
That's great to hear. If anyone in our audience has some reflections or thoughts that are brought up by our conversation or by the music you're about to hear, we welcome you to type them into the chat on Facebook, or those of you who are in our Zoom meeting to just write those right in the chat, and we'd love to hear your reflections as well as your questions. There'll be some time after the piece to discuss this as well. I just want to point out, before we move to actually performing the piece, I want to point out to anyone who doesn't know that the way Zoom works for live ensemble playing is that it tends to choose one or two voices to push through for everyone to hear, and the other instruments often get cut out. So if you find yourself hearing multiple instruments at the same time in this performance, which I know you will, you should be impressed, because this platform takes quite a bit of finagling to balance these voices. So at this time, I'd like to invite the prearranged audience members to turn on your cameras. You know who you are, so we can feel your presence more strongly in this meeting and performance. Sung, thank you for writing this thoughtful reflection of 2020 for us to hear today. We will now listen to you and the rest of 5x5, streaming live from your homes, the world premiere of Sungmin Shin's Postlude 2020. Shin's Postlude 2020 for 5x5. Sungmin, thank you for this music.
Thank you. Thank you for listening, and thank you for the performers.
I wanted to give another opportunity for any of our audience members to type a question into the chat, and I'd be happy to relay it to the composer or one of the performers before we head over to another piece written for 5x5 by Sophie Stone. It's really interesting reflecting on the last year and how we do the things we want and need to do, and how we create beauty in this situation. So, thank you. Thanks to those of you writing the notes in the chat, simulating an audience response in that way. We really appreciate it. We'll invite the audience members to turn cameras off at this point. Thanks so much. You'll have another chance to interact visually with our performers the next time. There's a question from Steve Gisby. Once the pandemic is over and 5x5 is able to rehearse and perform in the same space at the same time again, how do you think your experiences during the pandemic will impact your work? Are there changes you've been forced to make that will be continued, you think?
I can quickly chime in on that. I think quickly going back to the remote recording and how much I think we've evolved as a group through the remote recording process. In some ways, I think our standards have gotten higher through that process because we have more. We've been spending so much time with our recording projects, and we've had the ability to really kind of fine tune things. So I think when we get back together and play some of the repertoire, there's some of this repertoire that we actually haven't. We've recorded now, but we actually haven't played together in person, and it'll be a really interesting experience to actually play some of those pieces. And I think we're all suspecting that some of them are going to be very challenging, actually, in person, just because I think we've spent so much time with the recording and fine tuning things, and we'll have to really regroup our ensemble playing. But I think we'll also be just super excited to play just together regularly. I think just being in the presence, like what Laura was saying. I think just being in the same space, the energy and I think even obviously the sound is different when you're really like in the same room, and we try our best through Zoom, but it's definitely a different experience, right?
I think we will appreciate each other so much more, and I think we will be so grateful for being together when that happens. I think this feeling of many artists, many musicians were feeling isolated because we're supposed to make music and art with each other. And so I think there's definitely a deeper appreciation. I do think we may actually tap into using Zoom because sometimes schedules are complicated, and we are all super busy people with young children, 30 jobs, and so it may help us in how we work. We may decide that may actually change how we operate, because we usually meet weekly in person. And now we have this means, so it may change a little bit about how we operate.
Interesting how we've all been forced into this, but then are taking things from it that go forward. Thanks so much for the wonderful comments. We had Gene Peterson remarking how the bass sounds like a heartbeat, and apparently Eric replied that was exactly what was written in the piece itself. And some other wonderful reflections. Please keep sharing those in the chat. They are meaningful for us to all see. I'd like to move on now to the second piece by composer Sophie Stone. Sophie Stone is a composer of experimental music based in Kent, England. Her interests include open notation, drone and ambient music, quiet music, improvisation, interdisciplinary art, and collaboration. Her interdisciplinary work has included documentation and presentation of daily life, inviting an intimate experience into our realities. Sophie's music has been realized at festivals such as Ideas of Noise in Birmingham, UK, Eclectic Spring Festival in Huddersfield, UK, Soundwave Festival in Santa Ana, California, and Sound Thought in Glasgow, UK. Recent collaborations and commissions include an audiovisual work titled An Outside Space for Electric Medway and an experimental film collaboration with Michel Saint-Michel for House of Beautiful Business Festival in 2020. Sophie is currently in the process of completing a PhD in composition at Canterbury Christ Church University. Sophie, thank you so much for being with us today.
Hello, thank you so much for having me here.
We are so thrilled to have you with us and to explore your conceptions of music and experience creation. As an artist, you're deeply interested in experiences of different durations, long durations. You're known for an organ work lasting well over an hour that moves very slowly. And this piece that we're going to play today, called Postcards, is postcard-sized pieces, excuse me, is much shorter, of course. Do you have a history of extremes or of working in long and working in miniature? How do you feel about these things?
So I have an interest in durational music and the experience of sustained sounds, static textures, and slow changes to sound over time. But I'm also very interested in writing music which has an open duration and has the possibility of many different outcomes. So postcard-sized pieces is my first project encompassing many mini scores, but what's common in my practice is the creation of multiple scores for projects. For example, the piece Amalgamations that you commented on, it is for organ, but I've also written versions for piano and quartet and solo string instruments. And this is something that I wanted to explore further in postcard-sized pieces, where I could create further realization scores based on the main score. So the postcards can be played individually, but new performance or realization scores could be made to create special versions of the piece, such as what I've done for 5x5 and for Zoom.
So postcard-sized pieces is such a lovely thing for right now because they are these little individual card-like scores, correct? They come in could come in a pile for a performer to select one and then the next one in performance. It's almost like, sending that you've literally sent those postcards to performers across the ocean in this performance. What are you thinking about when you're creating multiple scores? Is the different iterations the extension of the piece? Are each one individual themselves? Should one listen to, for example, your amalgamations in an order, or are these separate craftsmanship?
I can consider, this is a good question. I consider all versions of the same piece being a part of the same piece, if that makes sense. So they are all amalgamations, or they are all postcard-sized pieces. There are just various tangents of those, and I'm excited by the various realizations that can take place from those.
Could you give us any more background into the design of this work?
Yeah, so postcard-sized pieces are a set of 30 or so small scores, which can be played in any way. And they comprise text scores, staff notation scores, blank scores, and something I call task scores. And I wanted to create something flexible that could be played in any way or engaged with by anyone, including non-musicians. And the scores themselves are very minimal and open to a wide array of interpretations. They're generally quiet and suggest engagement with environment, place, space, and collaboration. And I completed these postcards last year at the very beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, and I wanted to continue collaborating with people and musicians. So I started to explore Zoom performance as not just an alternative to live performance, but as a different and meaningful way of creating music together. So what I have done for 5x5 is create this timeline score where I have selected specific postcards. And there's also audience participation, which affects the trajectory of the performance. The score is almost like a flowchart type quiz that you get in magazines. And I should say, yes, there is audience participation, but we're going to keep this a secret, and we might be able to talk about this more after the performance.
Yes, so don't be nervous, anyone on Zoom. Won't be asked to do anything, but we'll explain further another time. So this piece was intended for this environment, of course. Had you said you completed it about a year ago? Had you started it before the pandemic began, or was the initial intention for Zoom format?
So I started creating the postcards probably a year and a half, 2 years ago. So it's been in the process for a long time of creating all these miniature scores, and I finally compiled them probably in March 2020. So I didn't get a chance to try them out in person. So my first initial step was to experiment with musicians online through Zoom. So it wasn't the initial intention, but I've now started creating music specifically for this medium.
Fantastic. You mentioned an interest in quiet music, and this piece that we're going to hear, this realization of postcard-sized pieces, is a quiet performance. That's not something that we encounter a lot in listening to music in our lives, is it? What could you speak a little more on this idea of quiet music and what that means to you?
Yes, so I have a very specific aesthetic preference for sound. I really enjoy quiet music, static sounds, long durations, because it's something that makes me happy, relaxed, and comfortable. So this is something that I like to do as part of my creative practice, is to create situations for that to take place. And I guess it stems from my personal listening practice and the sorts of music that I like to listen to, such as Eliane Radigue and her long durational electronic music, as well as music by the Wandelweiser Network, who are a group of musicians and artists who are very much interested in these types of sounds as well.
Mm. Would you say that the music is because it's so soft at times, are you explicitly inviting in environmental sounds? How does the world outside of the performer engage in the fabric of what you're trying to create?
So for me, the music is not just about the score or the music itself, it's about the whole situation, the way people engage with it, the use of space and the environment. So environmental sounds become a part of the music, and that's something I'm really interested in. And specifically through Zoom, this is such an interesting texture. Through more concentrated listening, we can hear the fragility and instability of Zoom, which is something I think is really special.
Yes, that reflects on some comments I've heard from other performers on Zoom in the contemporary music world about using Zoom as its own instrument. It becomes one of the instruments being performed, and the embrace of what might otherwise be considered imperfections or glitches or lagging, instead as being a reality that we're experiencing together and part of the fabric of what's happening. Thank you for that. Sophie, thank you for writing this really thoughtful piece for us to hear today. We'll be coming back to speak with you some more and the members of 5x5, but at this time, I'd like to turn things over to the ensemble and ask again that those audience members who were planning to do it turn on their cameras, and we will listen to 5 by 5 perform your piece. Once again, I advise those listening to use headphones for this subtle and soft music. Now we'll hear postcard-sized pieces. Thank you to Five by Five and Sophie Stone on this performance of postcard-sized pieces. We'll surely have some questions from our audience members. I'd like to start out with one that has been brought up by at least one audience member, asking about how you coordinate in Zoom, because there is latency and lag between when you produce a sound and when the other members of the ensemble hear the sound. Perhaps one of you would like to share with us a little bit about how the coordination works for this piece.
Well, one thing we should preface, I think, the both of the pieces today, because they were really designed to be performed on Zoom, that's kind of already this worked into the consideration, I think, of the composition in a way, and the process and how it all comes together. The one technical thing that I think we found is that if everyone wears headphones, that does help to minimize some of the lag. And I think just if you have access to a better quality microphone than the one that comes with your device, I think little things like that to help. But I think even with that, there still is some technical issues that you run into. And I think there's ways to overcome that, but it requires other software beyond Zoom that you use along with Zoom. So if you're only using Zoom, that it's going to be always a bit of the latency issues and things like that, right? But like I mentioned, the two pieces today, they're really conceived with that in mind.
Yeah, I think
Almost.
I'm sorry.
Sorry, please. I was just going to say, so it's almost not even a problem in the way that we might think. Laura?
I wanted to say I think the two composers were completely effective in democratizing the sound so that there is this sense of all the sounds have equal space, because now you can see I have a yellow square around I'm here speaking, and so Zoom acknowledges that, but their pieces really acknowledge this. Everybody has these quiet sounds, and it also encourages us to listen, I think, and to explore our softest sounds. Also, playing with the technology, we did a lot of sound checks to make sure that there was a democratization of the sound, and that took some practice, actually.
One other technical element that one of the composers included was actually performing basically with a stopwatch. So secretly, each of us has a stopwatch app, and mine is on a giant iPad that I have standing in front of me, and everybody has their own way. So we kind of knew at what point to transition to the next phase in that way on one of our pieces.
I want to share a few of the comments from the audience members. Hearing the music and connecting the scenes outside the musicians' windows with the images on the screen share had such a soothing effect. Another audience member commented on the sense of resonance between image, sound, and the energy of the sun in the video shared by Eric. The vibrations of the instruments shifting one note up, then down. The almost sacred silence of wind. Even the sweet shadows had a mindfulness. That was from Kitty Josby. Thank you for that. Would you like to share a little bit about the screen sharing and the visual component?
I think this is something that Eric should discuss. So one of the postcards that I gave Eric was to record and share his home. And what Eric decided to do was share the outside of his home, but I'll let Eric explain what he did.
Yeah, so over the course of the pandemic, I've been slowly moving where I practice music and do things into a different room. And I've purposely put my desk there and facing that window, and I also practice facing that window so I can see the pine tree there, and I really like it, and it's really a joy when a cardinal or blue jay happens to come by and hangs out listening to me practice, and so that's that's the part of my home that I really wanted to share in my score. And I got really lucky. I actually did it 2 different days. I did one when the sun was out because I really wanted to have sunshine because I could feel the spring right around the corner and I wanted to be outside. And then the other time I was sitting there doing some work and it was in towards the evening. I can't remember if this was before the time change or not. And the sun was perfect. It was just, it lit up the tree so magically. And I had to go film it at that point. And so then I redid the video so I would have that in there.
Wonderful. So Sophie has written directions like these into the score themselves when she spoke earlier about text directions. You know, there's notated music and there's also text and there's also blank pages which invite all sorts of possibilities into the music. What, and this could be open to Sophie or any of the members of the ensemble, what are you hearing and experiencing when you start a sound from silence into the niente, very soft volume level, and exit a sound in the same way? So it makes perhaps a shape, you know, like this. What is that experience like? I know that's something that was directed in at least some of your parts.
Well, bass players will get this, but you're always happy when the note does speak. Um, the strings are quite thick on a bass, so they can be a little bit. Um, Sometimes it happens. Well, most of the time it happens, but sometimes it doesn't. But I think for me, it's you have to get this sense of being one with your body. Like you're not up here, you're throughout your entire arm and into your hand. So you really have a full presence of yourself and relaxed into the sound and just trust that it will come out and you have this motion. It's really interesting because you start all this motion before sound ever starts. And then the sound, once it finally comes out, you can kind of relax into it.
I will add, piling on with what Eric said about doubting whether your instrument will work. When you're asked to play at extremely soft dynamics, there's always a risk that the note won't come out or that the microphone won't pick it up. And as a reed player, you know, our danger is always, did the reed dry out in the 10 seconds between that note and this note? Is it going to work when I blow into it? And it does feel very risky to play softly, and especially if you're coming in from a spot where there is silence, like any wrong thing that could happen there is not going to be hidden behind anybody else playing loud. So it's definitely engaging, and you know Eric was like talking about using the body. Yes, the body is involved, and the frontal cortex is also involved.
This piece really crafts an experience that is beyond sound, and it is about experiences and memories, as well as what's happening right now. Because Sophie, you invite people to present their home, right? Which in many cases I think is maybe a pre-filmed, and we had both here. We had a presentation that was live of turning the camera over, and a collage with a past presentation. Is this, you know, temporal complexity something you think about?
Sorry, I couldn't unmute myself then. Yeah, it's not something I thought about. I more think about creating a situation where other people can, or the players, musicians, have agency. So I give control up over the piece to the players and performers to make decisions themselves. So by giving this postcard of record and present your home to Eric, I gave him the freedom to do what he wanted with it. And out of these discussions and rehearsals came this idea of turning the webcams to the outside. where we're in our homes every day. It's very insular. We spend all day here at the moment. So just changing this focus on an outside world that hopefully we'll be getting to soon is something very beautiful and poetic.
Thank you. Really is. I really, you mentioned the giving up freedom to the performers. There's also certain triggers that cause certain actions in this piece. Could you perhaps just let the audience in on what that was about in terms of why we needed to see people? So there were some controls that were outside of you and also outside of the performer's actions, weren't they?
Yes, so the process of the performance is something that us listeners didn't know, as well as the musicians. The musicians didn't know how this piece was going to pan out. And I've created a score that's like a timeline. But also, if you remember teenage magazines, which have like a flow chart with yes and no to answers, it's a little bit like that, but with audience participation. So if someone is wearing glasses or has a drink or has a virtual background, it affects where the music goes and the postcards that will be played.
Yeah, so you're really inviting the musicians to look outside themselves, to both to their environment and to other people. Thank you so much for that. We really appreciate you spending some time with us today, Sophie Stone. Thank you for sharing this beautiful work with us and how your practice reaches out, beyond just the auditory. And it's been really great to talk with you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you to the audience and 5x5 and Evan as well.
So Sophie and Sung, on behalf of 5x5, thank you so much for being with us. We hope to see and hear from you soon. 5x5 is grateful to all of you watching at home. You can support further music by heading to 5by5music.com and clicking support. Please also consider helping communities with less access to the internet gain some of these resources by donating to these Rochester-based initiatives to address the digital divide. These initiatives are Action for a Better Community and the Children's Institute. You can find those links in the chat where you're watching right now and at 5by5music.com. Finally, we would like to invite everyone to the next composer chat, A Tiny Dream, with Anthony R. Green, composer and co-founder of Castle of Our Skins, an organization dedicated to celebrating Black artistry through music. We'll be premiering a new animated video featuring Anthony's work, A Tiny Dream. That's Saturday, April 24th at 1:30 p.m. 5x5 is Laura Lentz, Marcy Bacon, Sungmin Shin, Eric Polinek, and Haeyun Jun. Our technical team is Terry Bacon and Mark Webster, with assistance from Logan Barrett and Mona Segatola-Slami. I'm Evan Mecarello. Thank you for listening.